these are the things that you are good at, and these are the other things. Now, you can work on those other things, but what it is that psychologists kind of agree on the fact that personality really doesn't change very much. And so if your weaknesses, if they're related to your personality, it doesn't really matter how much you work at them, you're never going to eliminate them. And you can waste so much time and energy trying to make yourself to being somebody you're not. So why not look at your strengths?
So I guess the first question I wanted to ask you is like, how would you describe yourself? Like, how would you normally introduce yourself to people?
Yeah, I mean, that's the trouble, actually. I don't really know, because when people say that when they say I work at the university, and then they say, oh, yeah, what is it you do? I'm a professor. They say, what do you teach? And I say, well, I don't anymore, actually. I suppose that the shorter answer is that I'm really interested in leadership and way in which people work in teams. That's the stuff that I'm interested in. But these days, I tend to I'm sort of in a job involves. I describe it as going to meetings, which is just a way of getting people not to ask me anymore, I suppose. But it is a bit like that. I'm putting that into practice. I'm not really lecturing anymore. But
do you remember when you first got interested into leadership? When the first time you got interested into it?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think when I started at university, which was in 2000. I don't think many people were talking about leadership. There's a lot of talk about management, but I suppose I was interested in leadership as a consumer of it. I was being led all the time, and quite often badly. And I also noticed that it makes a huge difference. It makes a difference to your life, what your leader is, who your leader is, what your relationship with them is, and makes a massive difference to your performance as well as your as how happy you are in your job. But that's really where it came from, is that the most important person in your world, really, at work, is your boss, and how aware they are, how self-aware, how all that stuff is massively important.
It's funny because when I think of my first experience of, say, leadership, it probably like school, where you had like prefect, head boy, and there's a lot of like onus on being like number one, but there's not really any lessons telling you of how to be a leader or what it means to lead, other than just setting an example. And therefore you kind of build up a picture of leaders are goody two shoes, or they're perfect, like they can't do anything wrong. But in reality, real life world is very, very different like that. You've got some like roughneck type of leaders, and I think that kind of picture of what it means to be a leader is very, very different from how it is when you're younger and how it is now, you know?
Yeah, it is. There's so many different ways of being a leader. And I guess it's one of the things that the military do extremely well. My current boss is brilliant, but I don't think he's ever been taught how to be a leader. And I don't think there's any particular expectation of that. It's a bit accentuated in universities because of the rather odd way in which they run. But I think that's true in a lot of organizations where there is a certain amount of development available for people to get into that role. And I firmly believe that people can be, not everyone can be great at being a leader. It's not everyone's thing, but you can certainly improve how you work at it. It's that counselling thing, is that, the success of counselling really depends on whether the person wants to change or not. And that's the same with leadership, same with any personal development, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, fair. Talking of personal development, and also you mentioned the military, one thing that surprised me was that you actually used to be in the military, you used to be in the army. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about like that story, like what were your motivations to join in the first place? Because you even were trying to go into the Navy as well, right? So I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was a different time. Is that I've only just recently admitted to the thing about the Navy, funnily enough, and it's you've obviously found the paper, because it was something that I just tried to pretend didn't happen because I failed at it so badly. I was massively embarrassed about it. But it was also that it was, to be brutally honest, it was the only thing I could think of to do at school, because I could see that everyone else, I was at a grammar school, which there are not many of those left anymore, but the grammar school I was at, highly academic, and everyone there went on to university. There was only me and one other guy who didn't go to university, single-sex school. And my best mate got a scholarship to Cambridge. And, that was just something that was so beyond me. It may sound weird coming from a university professor, but I just could not understand how the thing at school went. And I had to find a way that I was going to be able to make my way in the world that didn't require good exam grades. And it seemed quite an exciting prospect to go into the Navy. And I had some struggles getting in, not my fault, just to do with defence cuts and stuff. But I got there, and having struggled to get there and planned my whole life from about the age of 13 to get there, there was something about it that I realised was not right. I just was not a fit for it. It's not something I ever admitted to until I think probably quite recently, is that it was just a bad mistake. It was just a mistake on my part, possibly on the Navy's part of taking me in the first place. But I managed to get through it. And as far as getting to officer training, and partway through officer training, I made such a mess of everything. And then in one particular case, a huge mess. And well, in those terms anyway, nobody died, no one was injured. It was just embarrassing. And so I came out.
What happened?
Right. So the second part of Navy training, your first term you're at Dartmouth, absolutely brilliant. I was sailing every day. I cannot say that there's very few parts of my life I've ever been happier. Sailing on the River Dart every day is really not, and being paid for it. But what I was then doing is we went away to sea on a big ship called HMS Fearless, which is a ship where they put landing craft in the back of. So it's a huge thing. And we had and it was set up for an obstacle race. And I was given the task of leading one of the teams. And the first thing we had to do was to make a dummy to put onto a stretcher to take over all the obstacles. And I couldn't be bothered. And so what I did is, there was nothing in the rules about what size it should be. So I drew a stick man on a piece of paper, put it in a matchbox, sellotaped it to the stretcher, and said, that's our... oddly enough, that didn't go down very well. But everyone there could see that we were going to get into trouble for it. But eventually it was, and I think, to be honest, they made the right decision. I think that there were a lot of things I could do pretty well, things to do with navigating ships and all that sort of stuff. But everything to do with quite rigid discipline, I couldn't. So I ended up back at home in early 1982, which was just, in the middle of Yorkshire, where the only jobs were in farming. And if you didn't own a farm, that was kind of it, really. And I just could not think of anything else to do. I think these days, when you can go online and find jobs somewhere else, I just couldn't see anything to do. Memorably, I went for an interview in a factory in Lancaster, which was it was known as the Knicker Factory. And I walked into this factory, and there was, 300 women working at machines who all stopped work and looked at me. I was absolutely terrified and thought, I don't know, I can't do anything like this. So, so I tried to join the army as an officer, and very foolishly admitted that I'd been in the Navy. And I think they looked at me and thought, well, he's failed the Navy training. What on earth do you think he's going to get through Sandhurst? And fair point, really. And so I still couldn't think of what to do. And so I ended up joining the army as a private soldier.
And then, what made you, that when you left the Navy, or when they told you it's time to go, like, because you had worked up so hard up to that point, were you able to accept it so easily? Or was it something where you was like,
no, not at all. I've written about this. It wasn't a job that I was going for. This was me. This was my identity. It was something that I would go on about. I'm sure everyone was heartily sick of it. But I identified as a naval officer. That's who I was. I was an officer in the Royal Navy. That was me. That's who I was. And if anyone else asked who, other people might say, "Oh, I'm training to be a doctor," or something like that, which has that sort of connection as well. But in this case, that was the only thing that I could think of. And so, yeah, when it was taken away from me, basically the person who I was went with it as well. Who are you? Well, I'm not in the Navy. I'm not a naval officer. Who am I? I'm just someone who did really, really badly at their A levels, and that was it. And so it sort of lost my identity, really. I mean, it's a fairly extreme way of putting it, but that really was my identity, who I was. And I have a feeling that some people are more prone to identifying more strongly with their workplace than others, and that I think I'm probably one of those, and so who would like to identify with something. And I have written some papers on this years ago to do with a thing called identification, part of your personality that comes from being in a group or in an organization. And so there's something changes about you when you're in a particular organization, especially one with a strong culture. And there isn't anything stronger than the military, really, in terms of culture.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, because I think even like how sometimes people introduce themselves, rather than them describing, say, the outcome of the work that they do, whether it be like if they're in banking, for example. So like I help people make more money. It's like I'm a banker or I'm a doctor. And when those things are removed away, then you have that kind of shift of what is my identity, you know? And I can imagine, especially if you had thought so much or put so much time and effort into becoming, say, like a naval officer, and then you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to be a factory worker. So then when you decided to join the military, like, was that kind of like a last option? Like, what was really going through your head when you decided to make that choice?
It was my first and last option, to be honest. I genuinely couldn't think of anything else to do. I did find that there was something, I got some sort of feeling in my own mind of being some sort of status attached to it. That there was, that I could, I'm off doing exciting things. I think maybe there was something in my mind that actually peacetime Navy isn't all that exciting quite most of the time. But it's sort of, and I do know, I kept in touch with some people I was in the Navy for a while, and I know that a lot of them found it quite difficult because it was nowhere near as exciting as they thought it was going to be. In a way, complete blessing that for a lot of years, we basically didn't have any wars. Since obviously the soldiers were going to Northern Ireland, the Navy was hardly involved, and so if you're sort of training for something that you're never going to do, it just becomes a bit odd sometimes. And even though you could pretend that it was great fun, which it was in some ways, still I have this incredible memory seared into my mind of, we were in Fearless, we were going around the Mediterranean, and because it has it had landing craft in the back, they drive the landing craft in and then you pump the water out and off you go. So we had this massive ramp on the back of the ship, stern. And what we did, it was the thing, Hamster bathing stations. What that meant was they put the ramp down, put some safety boats out, and everyone could jump into the sea. It was right in the, you couldn't see land. It was the most beautiful, clear, warm water that you could jump in and out and mess around with your mates. It was just extraordinary. And yeah, I won't forget that day. But in terms of excitement of what you were doing, it was all a bit false, really.
Because how does that experience compare with when you joined the military, though, in terms of like?
I joined the army, yeah. It was similar, actually, to be honest. There was, it just in terms of just very visually, on my passing out parade at Woolwich, the maximum number of medals anyone had was one. Because they all had a Northern Ireland medal and nothing else, because there wasn't anywhere else that was the sort of place they could be posted to that was regarded as being in combat. And so there wasn't any, there wasn't, you were training for something that wasn't happening, basically, and was never going to. We went through endless sort of training about the Russian threat and so forth. Yeah, and those of us who could do the sums sort of go, look, the Russians seem to outnumber us by several to one. if they wanted to invade Western Europe, they probably would have done so. So they're probably not going to. And if they do, we probably won't be able to do anything about it. So, so what's what are we doing? And what we were doing is just filling time, really.
That's crazy though, because because everyone needs to have that kind of always on ready mentality. And if the army feels like they're kind of twiddling their thumbs and not doing anything, like what are the officers doing to try and keep them kind of ready and prepared, because anything can change like that tomorrow?
Yeah, to be honest, this was my view. I'm quite sure it wasn't all the people there. I think it was probably a real test of leadership, to be fair, to try and keep a sense of readiness and to actually be like that. And I joined a regiment that actually had a very bad reputation for that, and for being ill-disciplined, violent, and yes. So and it was recruited in Glasgow, and you can imagine that my accent was the same as it is now, so I didn't really fit in. Although I mentioned identity, I've just noticed, of course, I use this mug every day, this is my old unit. I mean,
oh, interesting.
It's really weird, isn't it? I mean, it's, to be honest, there's a sort of there's an element to do with identity, yeah, and I'm very proud of that. And I used to talk about it a lot in lectures, and it was kind of a running joke, but it was also there was a part of me was thinking, I'm doing too much of this, and I thought, hang on, I will keep it in because it is my point of difference, and it's something that I've kind of used, and that you sort of show that what your personality is created from your experiences. And whilst I can't pretend that it was that great a time in the army, because I was desperate, I had no idea what else to do, and and so that was all I could think of. And so having gone out of the Navy, having basically been from the Navy because I wasn't any good at discipline, I then went to a place where it was even more disciplined. And in a sense, it was easier because there wasn't any question about whether you would do what you were told or not. Because if you didn't, you'd be literally taken around the back and beaten up. And so that was
No. So did you actually feel yourself transforming throughout the time that you were there?
Yeah. And I suppose it was a matter of some pride when I got round to when I actually finished the training. I thought, well, at least I've done that now. So it's sort of, I failed my exams, I've failed in the Navy, and I've now passed out of basic training. And it was, there was some family tradition there as well. And my dad wasn't in the army, but his father was, and his father and his father in that regiment. So he was, there was that, which was good. But that doesn't last very long when you're in a really horrendous barrack room in Germany, which was a likely repurposed SS barracks in Dortmund. So yes, which has now been demolished and is now the home of the Dortmund football club training ground. So that's a much better use for it. But I'd throw that one in. But it was. I mean, there was the only thing keeping me there was the fact that I literally didn't have any other options. Some fun times, in terms of being able to, drive around in big, heavy army machines and stuff. And I was quite good at the technical part of it. I was in an air defense regiment that had rockets. So I was, because I had more sort of qualifications than most of the others there. And I was able to work out how to mend it when it broke, because it did all the time. But
so, because how long were you in there for that?
Well, this is it. You see, very, very short time. It was 3 years. I was 2 years in the regiment, and then a year in a unit, which I can't say a unit that I'm not that proud of being in, because it was to do with arms sales, basically. It was selling arms missiles to anyone who would pay for them. And so any despotic government you could think of was paraded in front of us. So yes, anyway, that was what it was.
Well, that's an experience. Those 3 years are essentially like a university degree.
I do equate it that way in some ways. in that there's, I'm hoping that you had that experience as well of the 3 years being, yes, learning stuff, and yes, and being around other interesting people, but also just developing and finding out, who you were. And a 3-year period of time is pretty good for that. Although because of all the things, all of the false starts and whatever, I was 21 by the time I joined the army. So, so it was, and obviously 24 when I left. And
did you feel that you were kind of playing catch up, especially because at 21, your best friend who left Cambridge, he probably graduated from Cambridge by that point, right?
Yeah. And well, he was sponsored through university, so I went straight into a job, then into another one. And so, and it's, and that was, which was the case with pretty much everyone I was at school with, who, they went on to qualify as doctors or as engineers or whatever, and they were already, by the time I left the army, they were all very well into, their graduate training. Many of them had got houses and were starting to get married and stuff, and I just was starting again.
Yeah. I mean, I can relate to that as well, because before I started uni, I took a gap year, and so I saw all my friends, they already started university, so I was like, okay, when is it my time? And then still having to take a placement year, which, don't get me wrong, is amazing because it gives you all the skills that you need. But upon graduation, I felt like I was 2 years behind. And I think in a perfect world, I probably would have done maybe a master's or done some traveling. But I was like, no, I need to go straight into work, because there's that kind of competitive mindset. And it feels that you're getting older, but in reality, you're still early 20s. Like, you've got so much time ahead of you, but it does play in your mind where you just want to kind of rush certain decisions.
It does. I mean, there's, when I talk to people now, if they're thinking about going to university or whatever, I'm an advocate for it, because when I finally went to university, it was just transformational. Not because actually not really because I ended up working in a university, but because of the way in which it made me think, that people I met and all that. But I'm really glad that I didn't go straight away. I could have possibly wangled a place at university somehow. Back in 1981, you probably could. But I was pretty sure that I was going to do badly at it, because I'd done badly at academic study all the way through. And I also knew that it had to be a subject I was fascinated by. And so if you've got that in the core, if you've got, then you're being challenged with your intellectual development. But if you're still at the core really, really fascinated by what you're studying, then it can pull you through. But it's also something that you keep with you. But I mean, maybe we're jumping ahead. I think that it's really important that that's possibly one of the things, the only benefits I can think of to do with tuition fees, which I don't know anyone who works in university is happy about the way that works, because most of us came through university with little or no fees, and the idea of seeing everyone pay a lot of money for it. And not only that, it's not, even though it's a lot of money, it's not quite enough. So it doesn't work well from any angle you look at it. But it might mean that there's a look, you've got to really think about this. And when I left school, you were even paid money to go there. And so it was, I don't know what to do. I think if I can go to university, I might as well, because why wouldn't you? But I think that there's, even though it was very much elitist in those days. If you went to a grammar school, you could probably get into university, but if you went elsewhere, you possibly wouldn't even think about it. Which is also not good. But I think there is that thing about making a positive choice about it. You can't necessarily know where you want to go with it, and the majority of undergraduates don't, and that's fine. No, I didn't when I went to university, but it's the self-discovery and taking opportunities for that. I think that's the important thing.
No, definitely. So then, for you, when you left the army, did you have like a clear picture of what you wanted to do next? Like, were you thinking of it when that day came?
Well, in broad terms, I'd noticed that this was the Thatcher boom years, and I wanted to make some money. Yeah, and simple as that. It's all right, in the army, everything's found for you, but you have to pay for it. And it was very little money. Very few people had a car or anything like that, and it was you couldn't afford it. But sounds like it's a long time ago. But it was, that's the way it was. And I thought, right, I'm just going to make some money because I think they'll give me some sort of independence. And I found that having my background still didn't really qualify me for very much at all. And so I found a job where I didn't really need qualifications for again, which was working in recruitment. Where I got a job where I turned up at work and I think they gave me half a day's training. It was doing accountancy recruitment. And I think they took a half a day to explain the qualifications and then gave me a desk chair and a phone and the A to D yellow pages for London. So off you go. Find some jobs, find some candidates to fill the jobs with, and crack on.
I guess now, as a professor, and you mentioned that you decided to go to university at some point, was it during that period of working where you said, I'm going to go back to uni?
No, not quite. I moved jobs again I thought going up market, and within weeks they closed our department down. I think what they were doing was a way of getting everyone to sign a new contract. Then they would pay redundancy, and I was kind of caught up in that gameplay. And me and another guy set up on our own. We did well for a while, but for a matter of a year maybe. But then we hit a recession, and I just became, well, pretty much ill with it, really. And he kind of said to me one day, look, I think there was 4 or 5 of us working there by then. One of us needs to go, and I think it needs to be you. And I went, yeah, I think you're right. And so I went from being a director of a company and giving it large about how well we were doing and stuff. And I suppose to a certain extent we were. And with a mortgage on a house in Stratford, East London, I went from that to having no job and living in a squat within a matter of weeks. It was quite a dramatic divorce.
Us? There's several steps now.
Oh my! Sorry to throw that one at you. Yeah.
So, because this is another, it's like another example of like identity again. Because now it's like identity as a director. You've got your own business, you've got your house, and then in a matter of weeks, everything just falling apart.
Yeah, and I mean the identity went quite quickly. Although I had another embarrassing thing I have to admit is that even after a while, when basically I was more or less fired by the person I was in business with, but I'd come to a stage where I was so stressed and wasn't really producing, and you could see that it was the best way. I absolutely don't blame me for doing it. I think it was the right choice. I kept on turning up at the office, not every day, but I would turn up for a few weeks anyway, just to say hello or whatever. But I wasn't sort of one of these business people would family would only find out years later that I hadn't been working. No, it was that strong, and had to get rid of the house, and I which had just completely lost all its value. But I ended up because I was in the sort of the people I hung with. There was a few people I knew from school lived nearby actually, and that I'd known for a long time, and they were all just working cash in hand, being in and trying to make it in bands, and which seemed like a nice thing to do. And eventually, what I did when this happened, I'd been talking with a friend of mine about setting up a stall on Portobello Road, and that's what we did at that point. We found a sort of, in a sense, it was another finding a difference here. We found that you could buy jeans by the pound in New York and sell them at vast profit in West London. It was tricky to work out how we got about that, but it was not quite arbitrage, but it's that sort of thing, finding where you do that. I mean, it's really funny to see that there's kilo sales now, which is sort of the thing that was happening in these warehouses in New York in 89, back in 89. So yeah, it was losing that identity was relatively easy actually, because I had a new one. I had a new one to go to, which was, one that I was ill-suited for. It was someone who's extremely cool and on the edges of the burgeoning indie rock scene which was To be fair, when that came to an end, my friends carried on doing it. He's still doing it now, and he does very well with it. He's taking it in a different direction. The excitement of being on Portobello and seeing most of the members of the Clash most weekends was just very exciting. That's very exciting.
Yeah. That's really cool. So when did you realize with that business that it was time to leave then?
What's time to leave the market?
Yeah.
Yeah. I call it my 4 a.m. epiphany, is that we were hand-to-mouth existence. I did move out of the squat into a housing association, which was kind of a step above it. It was more next door, actually, but it was in houses that were eventually going to be knocked down or partly knocked down for the M11 link road. So we had it very cheap from the Department of Transport. It wasn't a comfortable place to be. It was all right. It was fine, and it was very cheap. But what I found was that there was getting up at 3:30, 4 o'clock on a Friday morning and heading down to Portobello Road and knowing in the middle of winter, if it was raining and sleeting, you were very unlikely to sell anything. But you had to be there or else you'd lose your pitch. And I just thought, I got to find something different. I really do. And I think I need some more options.
In my head, like, you're doing a lot of business, right? You're an entrepreneur, you're making it happen. How do you end up becoming a professor? Because I can't see how that.
Well, no. Yeah, I think it's right. That's right. In fact, I saw a relative I hadn't seen for a long time a couple of years ago, and they just went, "How did that happen?" She went, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that." Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I managed to get a place at the University of Westminster, which in my eyes, is just the transformational moment where someone literally decided to take a gamble on me because they had a new course which hadn't been trained enough for them to recruit conventionally. I was turned down by every single university in London, apart from University.
Why did you think you wanted to go to uni now, though? Why did you decide to go to uni, though?
I didn't really know. I knew that there would be more options, and that and it looked as though when I was coming out of the army, I had some skills. I didn't really know how to present them, which is odd because, of course, that's my job now, is helping people work out that. But I knew that if I had a degree, then there would be other options open to me. I didn't really know what those things might be. I had a vague idea I might become a journalist or a radio presenter. But, and you probably didn't really need a degree for that either. But I just thought that it would be a good thing to do. I'd become interested in psychology. I'd come across a book that I think my elder sister had years ago called Sense and Nonsense in Psychology. And I just found it fascinating and tried to understand how people were the way they were. And I thought, okay, so I'm fascinated enough by this subject to be able to study it for a bit, which is, I thought, very sensible actually, prerequisite. And also thinking, I really can't do this market stuff anymore. I'd gone back into being a reservist in the army at this point, because that paid. But I'd also realised that I really ought to leave it alone. I really ought to say the army isn't for me, but which I did at the end. But mainly because I needed to drive the van on a Saturday morning down to the Portobello Road, and I needed also to be driving a Land Rover out on Salisbury Plain, so the two didn't work together very well.
A lot of driving.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, what's to do with broadening my horizons, and which sounds very purist, particularly that I was, by this time I was just nearly 29 when I applied for university, and so I think my parents must have been tearing their hair out, really, sort of thinking, when is this guy going to actually do something? Because there's all you're bright enough, you think you should be able to do something, and I just couldn't figure it out. And so I thought, well, I'll go to university, see what happens. And then towards the end of my time at university, one of my lecturers suggested I did a PhD, and I thought he was mad. And then another lecturer suggested it, and she was a bit more persistent. And and God bless you, Catherine Loveday, who I'm still in touch with. And I took my sort of persistent sales techniques to getting a PhD studentship, and in the end, I was offered about $5. But I took the one that was closest to my then girlfriend, and the one that involved riding on the back of fire engines. So, she's no girlfriend; she's my wife. But
She's one.
yeah. So it's that was I can't say doing the PhD was easy. It was terribly difficult. I found it incredibly difficult, but I sort of got to a point where I'd done enough. The study at university as well, I also didn't find easy at all at first, and which is I think came to be useful to me later in terms of, I hope anyway, understanding that not every student gets how to get through university, because there's an assumption, I think, by too many lecturers that students will just get it, and you shouldn't tell them. But I believe you should. So, but anyway, yeah, I managed to get onto that, and a funded PhD student by the Home Office, on the grand total of £6,000 per annum, tax free, which. But it was really hard work, fascinating at times, but just so often I felt myself staring at the wall, going, "What the hell am I supposed to be doing?" No. There is an identity thing here as well, to be honest, is that I never really lost the idea that I couldn't be doing something with it. I thought probably I was going to be a consultant, because I couldn't see how I could be a university lecturer. And wasn't sure that I could fit into universities, which is, it's sort of, but it's because of I always had this instinct to be a bit entrepreneurial, try and do what's now called having a side hustle, but which I didn't realize at the time is something that happens in universities a lot. So, that's how it was. The transition was to go to the PhD, because without it, you're with some exceptions, different professions, but you need a PhD and you need to be publishing papers. That's how you get to work in a university, and it's quite a high bar. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything's starting to make so much sense now, because I remember in our first lecture, like Introduction to Organisational Behaviour, and in our uni in Aston, so the people listening, you're given you have to study, I think, 12 modules, and it doesn't matter whether you're studying marketing, economics, or operations, everyone has to do the same kind of standard subjects. And you taught organizational behavior. And I remember you had the book of how to write essays. And number one, everyone enjoyed going to your lessons because it was different. It had stories. And number two, you gave people the manual, essentially, of how to pass your exams or how to pass your essays and coursework. No one else was doing that. Looking back at your background, it's all making sense, especially you have that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, which you rarely see in lecturers. And you've been able to do that. Even I saw that you started piloting video clips and showing that to the faculty about how that could improve engagement across other students. So that piece has always remained constant throughout your career. Is that right?
That's right. I'm really touched you've mentioned that, and it was because that was exactly the intention. Because I literally can remember my first lecture at university, sitting there. My first lecture was on linguistics, which is part of the strange degree I ended up on. I didn't understand a word of it. I was sitting there going, "Oh my God, I thought I was stupid. I really, really am. Why the hell am I going to get through this? I didn't, And I sort of put my hand up and said, sorry, I didn't really follow a lot of that. Is there a book that I could read to follow up on? Because they didn't sort of give that sort of stuff. And he said, "Oh, this seems a bit tricky, isn't it?" "Yeah, it is a book. It explains it very well." And I could see everyone in the lecture, all 100 went, "Oh, God," writing down the name. And the funny thing was in linguistics, I actually was part of a panel actually doing a quality assessment on our linguistics department. Actually, only yesterday.
A lot of
But,
memories.
oh yeah. That's probably why it's in my mind. But yeah, it was. I thought that was I decided to take that approach to it, and it was, to be honest, one of the reasons that I found Aston is such an important part of my life as well, to be honest, in a very different way to yours, I'm sure, is that I was offered a part-time job there when I was working as a consultant. We're trying to set up my own consultancy, what I had, and it wasn't bringing in anything at all, or not very much. And I got a 40% of a full-time contract at Aston. And there was two things that happened there. The first thing was, Patrick, we want you to teach organizational behavior. Can you do that? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I'd never heard of it. I had no idea what it was. Literally never heard of it. I must admit one day to Mike Weston, who was the head of the department, actually that's what it was. But when I looked at it, I thought, I think I can make something out. And I think the first year that I did it, I think it must have been a lecture 2 or 3, and I was lecturing in this lecture theatre in Warwick. It's called the Warwick Lecture Theatre. I don't know if you remember. I don't. And I suddenly had this moment going, oh God, I can do this. Yes, I finally find it. I don't know how old I was by then, mid-30s, late 30s, something like that. It took me a while, but yes, this is it. This is the one. And it was a real big wow. I got sort of hairs on the back of my neck. I was thinking about it. Just genuinely remember the moment. And I thought, yeah, somehow it all works. I don't know how, because it was not a subject I'd been taught at university. It was stuff that I pulled together. The reason I taught stories, I didn't know the literature, so I actually made something up about it.
Oh goodness!
I might just
because organizational behavior is
I must have made myself redundant.
No, not at all. Because I feel like it kind of informs a lot of the research that you do currently, like looking into, say, workplaces, looking at how people can just become better employees or managers, right? And I see that you also do a bit of coaching, like executive coaching. What type of like transformations do you aim, or do you help them with? Like, why do they come in to seek you, basically?
Well, it's quite a range, really. I think that some of I had a large contract with a big oil company where people had gone through a technical route. They'd become engineers, well known, promoted for being good engineers, got to a point where they were going to go into a general management route, and they realized, or other people realized on their behalf, that they needed to understand what are generally called soft skills, which is a terrible name for it, but that's how you deal with people, how you lead people, how you motivate people. And those I found very, very satisfying, because particularly if their minds are open to it, and they may well have not come across these ideas particularly before. Those were really important ones. And I found I've done something a bit similar with hospital consultants who are moving on to being head of department or running a research group or whatever. And that, very often that they're, open to those things. Well, I don't have really, for some reason I had quite a lot of work in call centers at one point, doing, consulting work. And I found there's a lot of satisfaction with people doing that as well, sort of figuring out how to make the job. There's not much you can do about actually the tasks in the job, but how you think about it and how you work with other people. Finding out where those points are, and so quite a number of different things. And most recently, I've been working with some people on big career changes, and trying to figure out what they want to do next. Sometimes people who have been wildly successful, so that there isn't a financial need to work anymore. Sorry, do that. Yeah, but it is actually, but it's a really challenging thing. I mean, in a sense, I really wish my business ventures had been successful, so I was hit with that problem. But it is a very big problem. And particularly, one in particular who was, and this is the thing I find about it, is that the things you get from it, the things you actually learn from going through this. If I'm not learning from doing this stuff, then it's not really interesting to me. But he's sort of saying, he sold his business for a lot of money. and could live very well without working again. But that just wasn't interesting to him. What he wanted to do something else. But he also said this really crucial thing, which was he worked very hard, had a good idea, went all the way through with it, but he was also lucky. And he recognized that he was lucky and and knew that he wouldn't necessarily be lucky again. And I think that so few people in that position have that view. And you do all the things, you can do, and you can come out with the slogans, work on something you love, you'll never work a day in your life, you work hard and you just keep on going, you push through all that stuff, which is important. But he'd recognized that he'd been lucky. So I as well. And I think that's just an incredible thing to be able to do from that viewpoint.
So how do you what's your approach with clients like that, whether it be that person or somebody who's trying to change their careers or going from a more technical to a managerial position? Like, what's your framework of giving them that transformation?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it. To be honest, I've tried to avoid using psychometric tests pretty much all my career. Some of the times I'm working on projects where you have to. I recently, let's say 5 years ago, something like that, came across a thing called Strength Scope, which is a test of strengths. And there's a number of these tests around. What it does is it is a personality test, but what it does it in a particular way, which then says, these are the things that you are good at, and these are the other things. Now, you can work on those other things, but what it is that psychologists kind of agree on the fact that personality really doesn't change very much. And so if you're things that you're not good at, so things that your development needs or whatever you would like to call them, or weaknesses you may call them, if they're related to your personality, it doesn't really matter how much you work at them, you're never going to eliminate them. And you can waste so much time and energy trying to make yourself into being somebody you're not. So why not look at your strengths? Play to your strengths. Yeah, do whatever you can to acknowledge there are things, your blind spots. Find ways around it. Find ways of being a bit better with it. And then, but most of your time should be spent playing to your strengths. And I found just a huge amount of benefit comes from it. In fact, you mentioned earlier that there was an interview I did, an article I did, which was in the New York Times, and that was a profile of the chef Julie Jew, and we did this thing which I think sometimes people might have thought wasn't ethical, but it was done totally with her agreement. Is that we did this personality test on her and showed and shared what her strengths were, and she had a remarkable career and lots of different things that she'd done that were amazing. And we were able to talk through how her strengths were shining through in those ways. I think that she was probably aware of at least some of them. But the way in which you do this is to then figure out what you do with that information. And that's the key thing for me. That's how I started all the time. And I think that I'm yet to come across anyone who doesn't find it a useful experience, to be honest. I know I sound like I'm selling a cult here or something, but it's
no.
really.
I want to give it a shot because in my mind I think of, like, I don't know. There's always been like an onus to be well rounded and making sure that you have your strengths, but your weaknesses aren't like your Achilles heel. There's still things that you can do. I don't know. Sometimes I'm a believer that if I really, really try, I can do something. But then what you said kind of resonates. Like, why waste your time on those areas which are your weaknesses, where you could really make your natural abilities shine through and become even better, right? But it's like a mentality shift.
It is. It's and because it's a natural thing to sort of look at the weakness side of it. I had the terrible troubles with this with these really high achieving hospital consultants who would ignore the strengths, and I spent ages saying it's about the strengths. You just it's fun. You get the test out, they get right. I'm. Why does it say I'm bad at this? And I'm against what scale is this? And you no. Look, let's just have a. and it's very, and it goes against everything. Well, certainly the way the education system's set up, isn't it? I mean, this is, you must get into the, what's my mark? Where do I stand in the rankings, sort of thing? Yeah. And it's just a very different mindset.
Yeah. Have you noticed like a particular tactical way that's been more successful in helping people shift their mindset to become a bit more strength focused than say weakness focused?
I think that I end up quite often, even though what I've just said, starting with the development opportunities, because you can see there are some gains to be had. I mean, I was simplifying it a bit. If you see that, that there's something that that usually they're aware of this as being an issue for, and to sort of say, well, there's normally some things you can do with whatever it is, helping with prioritizing things or with whatever it is, and you can do some things with that, and so you can say, but you can limit it though. So say we're just going to do a little bit of that, but what we're mainly going to do now is to see whereabouts these are in your job at the moment, and particularly with those people who are thinking of a new career. You think you're obviously talking to me because your career isn't going well, or you don't like it. And here I can see why it is. And like with the example of Judy, she was working in the trading floor on Wall Street, and which was an amazing thing for a woman, and a woman of East Asian origin as well. It was extraordinary. But there were a whole load of things in her personality you could see were not fitting. She had a really strong drive to be creative, and that just wasn't where it was with that. And she was saying, yeah, I can see that's why I felt I had to go away and do something else. And she also has a very strong need to be in charge, and so that's why she has her own company. It's probably going to stay relatively small because she needs to be in charge of it and being creative. And so you can see how you're going to make sense of those things, and to sort of say that, the things that were, on the at the other end of the scale are things that, that are not important in her current job mostly. So that's being able to point those things out. And I don't necessarily I'm not a careers advisor, as it were, but what I'm more interested in is just pointing out the things that people enjoy and why they might enjoy them, and see how that leads into the workplace.
Sometimes it is hard because you have to balance the things I'm good at, things I enjoy doing, things that can make me money, and even things that yes as well. Because the status thing, as I was saying before about identity, like it's easy to say I'm a banker. It's another thing to say I'm trying to think of something which is, no, I'm figuring it out basically. Now you haven't got an identity yet, and balancing, or even no, let's say that again. Like if you were a banker, if you were someone senior, like a BP, you were killing it, but now you essentially quit and you want to start from scratch again, and with hard work you might get back to the high heights that you got to, but it's going to be a long journey, and you have to kind of accept that.
I think, to be honest, the status thing is something that is difficult to talk about. I mean, but it's true. I mean, it's much as I would like to say that I love this job because of the way in which I can help largely young people and possibly children. I like being called professor. I really do. Which my family have taken on board as a way of making sure I don't like it too much. So,
where should we pat when you're at home?
Well, no, it's the only time I get called professor at home is when I've done something really stupid. No professor, but and it is, and so I try to, sort of play it down a bit, and to be aware of it too, and that there's, and I think that you can call it status, you can call it feeling a sense of worth, I suppose, and with all sorts of ways of looking at it. So because you do need to, the ideal thing is that you have a job that you feel you're doing something that's useful, that you feel proud to do, and that feel that your strengths are sort of are married to, and so that's difficult to get. all the time, but some of the time anyway. Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about like bravery, because bravery, a lot of you, like I always say this, like bravery and the word brave, it's not a word that we've used since we were like in school in terms of like fairy tales, but every single day we encounter some type of brave moves or be courageous. So for example, with the clients that you have when they want to make a career change, that's an example of being brave or having courage. Can you tell me a little bit more about like what that means to you and some of the psychology behind it?
Yeah, well, I was literally a phone call I took once saying, could you do some stuff on do you know anything about courage? And I say yes to these things. And when I looked into it, I found it really, really, really interesting that it was done in a military sense to start with, and why is it that some people respond well to being under fire and stuff, and something that I'd never experienced in my time. But I've come to obviously recognise that that's massively important, and I was so proud to be part of there's an exhibition of Victoria and George Crosses at the Imperial War Museum, which I helped put on, and the video of me talking about it in the gallery. But I think that I'm actually at least as impressed by other forms of courage now. People make a stand in particular, where there's where you don't necessarily know that there's a safety net, where you're a whistleblower perhaps, but also, I mean, there's even sort of lower levels of that as well. I think that coming to the reality of a situation, if you like, we can kid ourselves a lot about what's going on around us, say, oh, it's fine. And when I was setting up my consulting business, I'm really proud of the fact that I said, look, this is not working, and I pulled the plug on it. And in a sense, I could do, because I by then had started work at Aston, so I had a possible way out. But I did that before I'd actually got agreement to go full time at Aston, so I didn't know. And I think it was a massive thing for me to do, is to say, I'm no longer this person who has a successful consulting business in this interesting area of work psychology. That's gone. And I think that's a courageous move. And I think that's, lots of people do way more courageous things than that. But I think that's an everyday example of it, and to be able to face up to it. And I think that people do that sort of thing every day when they say, no, this is being honest, perfectly honest with yourself and with other people. That tends to be the origins of the courageous part, and being able to stand up and say, this is not going to be easy, but it's the right thing to do. And those sorts of things are massively important parts of being a good human, I would say.
Yeah. Are there any ways to kind of build up that sense of courage? Because sometimes, because it's that weighing of the different risks element. So speaking up, being a whistleblower, I might get fired. With the Victoria Cross examples you gave, I might lose my life. Are there ways to kind of build up that type of like fearlessness, would you say? Or is it a personality thing?
I think that the split second ones are easy to understand, but very difficult to predict how anyone will result in it. And the root of many of those are, someone had to do this, and it had to be me. I was the only one who could do it. I was very interested to see at the recent coronation, which I saw some of. I saw Johnson Beharry there, which was carrying the banner of his native Jamaica. And it was wonderful to see him there. I've only met him a couple of times. I remember one of the things because he's got a Victoria Cross, and what he described was that his identity was the driver of that vehicle. He was the driver of that armoured personnel carrier, and his buzz was shooting at it and breaking it, and he was really cross. And also that as his job as the driver, there were people who were being wounded and even killed in the back of it, and he felt responsible for them. So therefore, that's what I'm going to do. And it happened in his case. He had to do it several times in quite a short space of time. But so there was an identity thing with that. What does a person like me do in a situation like this? And, thank good, because he's never had to do anything like it, particularly since. I don't think, anyway. But there is that it does come back again to this theme of identity, which has been through this this discussion, hasn't it? And that, what does a person like me do in a situation like this? What is the expectation? And there's this idea that I can't refer it to somebody else; it's down to me, and that is a leadership question very much, and it's leadership not necessarily in the case of having lots of people working for you, if you like. It's a leadership in terms of setting an example and so forth. And this is very often the discussions I would have with hospital consultants who would be, would have a senior position, and they would be in situations where other people would do what the consultant was, they were in charge, but they weren't managing people. They weren't the line manager or the team leader of it. And what they were doing was leading by example and by setting out what the standards were and the way in which they wanted to go. And this included very often being able to stand up and acknowledge some really difficult things sometimes. And I think we only hear about the times when this doesn't happen. I think some of it comes down to security. There's a sort of an idea of confidence at the root of it. But if you're in a situation where if I stand up and say this, I will probably lose my job and therefore will not be able to work and probably lose my house and my family will not be able to, and you think that's one thing, isn't it? And there's another thing, which is, it will be difficult for me in many ways professionally, but not as extreme as that. And so, I think you have to understand these things in the round, and maybe the courageous thing is to say, I can't do it. I have to, this is where are my priorities.
So it's like
Sorry?
No, go on.
I mean, it's the sort of thing that you have, it's not a split-second decision most of the time. So those split-second ones are just, the military-type ones, and there's other ones, other things you see like that. So this in the fire service as well, built on professionalism, built on identity, built on training abilities, and so forth. But there's another thing, which is this longer, slow thing, which I've heard referred to as cold courage, which is, I don't have to do it now. I don't have to even do it tomorrow, but maybe I'm going to have to think about doing it at some point. And that is, if anything, takes requires a deeper dig into character. And
in what sense? A bit more.
Well, there's you've got time to decide whether there's an option, whether there's an alternative, and that you're in a comfortable position, or a relatively comfortable position, and whether you stand up to someone, whether you stand up to a bully, take them on, whether you decide, no, I've just got to step away from this particular job and not really know where I'm going with it. And so that takes a lot. And particularly as you go along, early on with my consultancy business I mentioned before, I remortgaged my house against that. It's not a courageous move. That's a really stupid thing to do, really. Because, I refer to it in a like-hearted way most of the time, but it's not. If I couldn't convince the bank to lend me money against my business, I've got to ask, is this a viable business? And in recent times when I've been pitching for funds, it's not necessarily the way you think about it first. You think, it's idiots don't understand what a fantastic chance. They're so stuck in their ways. I think the courageous thing to do is to be able to say, that's not working. And I'm a big fan of hard work and going for everything as hard as you can, sort of thing, and sticking at it and whatever. And pretty much every move on. When I got the job here at Warwick, and I think I'd applied for 35 jobs between the job I'd had in London and this one. And not only that, one of the refusals I had was this one.
See, so that's interesting because it goes to the question of when do you know when to give up?
Exactly. I don't know. I mean, there's a really old song that you quite sure you won't know. But it's called the Gambler's Song. It has this a refrain. You've got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them, know when to walk away, know when to run. And I think that's really what it comes down to. And the only lecture I do this year is every year here at Warwick is on failure, and I play the poor unsuspecting students this old country song, Kenny Rogers singing. And but I think it has a very good point, is to say, at what point do you say, actually, I need to think of something different here? And so, I mentioned that I'd developed an app so that students could look at their learning materials on their phones in a particular way. And I was completely convinced about it. But a number of things happened whereby it lost momentum or whatever. I was then pitching for private equity or venture capital or whatever. And after a while, and that, he came back pretty clearly that this was too early stage for whatever reason. And eventually, I didn't necessarily stop with that, but I decided that maybe I needed to think of a different way about going about it. I haven't quite finished with it yet, as it were, but that idea of not, because fortunately I haven't sort of pinned everything on it, and nor would I if I had the money, I wouldn't, because I would want to make sure I could persuade other people that it was worth it. I'm not going to be going out on them again, but I mean, I think that's the difficult thing, is to say, actually, this isn't working. We need to think of it. Maybe there's some parts of it we keep those, and we work on them in a different way. And it's a dreadful world in the entrepreneurship space called pivot, which where you just, okay, so I'm not going to do it quite this way. And there's so many successful businesses operate that way, where, and of course it's enshrined in the book on the lean startup, which is exactly that. You try something and you see what works about it. You try again, and I think that's a really, really good way of doing it.
Yeah, like Slack is probably the biggest example of a pivot. They were making software for gaming companies, and the tool which they were using to message everyone internally was Slack. They made that into a product, sold to Microsoft for billions. That is a question, because you can always look back at things with hindsight, but looking forward is the hardest thing ever. And you can always rationalize things going well or rationalize things going badly. But the thing that you mentioned earlier, like what the entrepreneur guy that said about luck being such a massive factor, and you need luck on your side. End of the day, you really do.
Yeah, and you have to sort of see a point, and I think it's a really important decision to make, is that we've done everything we can, and it's not working. It's upsetting. It's we now need to. So, right, what's next? And but there's always a sort of there's part of me always at that point thinks, just one more, one more. One more, yeah. One more push.
So you mentioned you teach a class on your failure. Is that right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yes. What's the lesson? What do you teach? What do you teach about that class?
Well, being here at the University of Warwick, in common with all universities, you have very bright students, and they're quite exceptionally bright. They would be appalled if they know what my A-level results were, but there we are. But they are very, very clever. They've been through, and they work very hard at their A-levels to get to university here. And they're doing a module on entrepreneurship, and it's from across the university. So there's students doing maths and classics and business, and there's all sorts of people. And so they talk about different parts of entrepreneurship, and mine is about when things go wrong. And that's so I stand up and say, well, I'm going to talk about failure. And the previous lecture is talking about the theory of failure and the fear of failure. And I stand up and say, right, I'm going to talk about 4 failures. They're all mine. I could have taken more of them, but these are 4 failures of mine. And you've failed? Because of course they've never failed anything. Well, not there's a simplification, but yeah. So and I think I think they do appreciate it, because they think that they do realise that they're going to have to fail. They're going to have to pass. They're going to have to face up to things when they don't pass at some point. That they're going to be able to get through exams, but they may be going to try things that don't work. And how do you try to move past that? How do you get to a point where you say, really, honestly, in my heart of hearts, do I think this is working? And what are the measures that I've put in place to see the measurements, to see how it's going? The metrics are telling me it's not working. Do I need to just keep on going, tweak it? Or do I say, and I've talked about how to be really committed and passionate, but also ready to drop it and say, no, that's, because the people I've seen who've done well in starting their own business are absolutely passionate about what they do, until the moment where they see it's not worked, and it's a shame, and not have that pouring. You do need to pour yourself into it in a sense, but you don't have to become that person. You don't have to be known as that person. Ideally, I mean, that doesn't always happen, but it's yeah.
Have you noticed any like common traits between those who are successful, especially with your clients or anything like that?
I think the people who I've seen who are successful in terms of working in another, not necessarily in their own organisation, but the ones who are successful at getting the best out of other people are really good at self-reflection and very good at listening to other people. And sometimes people manage to bludgeon their way through by just being, arrogant and self-centered and egotistical. And I think we probably will work for people like that. I don't think about for you, but and sometimes they seem to, sometimes they get on, and that's just the way it works sometimes. But there's a lot of work done about how people with who are borderline on sort of borderline having serious psychological problems can sometimes be wildly successful in whatever way, in terms of making money or being promoted. But the ones who really do well are the ones who are able to really bring people along and get the best out of them. The ones who listen are the ones who know themselves and know other people. I mean, it sounds like a sort of a woolly psychologist thing to say, but it's that's, to me, I mean, you've got to know enough about the business. You've got to know enough about the work, because if you don't really understand how the business works, then you're really not going to be able to bring people with you. But you don't need to be the best expert on it. You don't need to be that. But the enough technical knowledge, but there's mainly that thing about knowing yourself and being able to reflect on it.
Okay, got it. And I guess, like, in a longer term, broader sense, do you see any changes happening, say, in the way like people are developing their careers, entrepreneurship, anything that you're really paying attention to right now?
What I see is that there's a lot of talk around about how the world is very a different place to what it used to be, and it kind of is. You're obviously in some way, but I think that the main parts about it to do with having a good idea, being able to execute it properly, as the jargon goes, being really good at the way in which you put it into work, and being able to understand the costs and do you understand the price and the market and how other people work. And those are the same things that have been there forever. They manifest themselves in slightly different ways. Sometimes people are able to just work remotely all the time and barely meet each other and stuff like that. And so there is a requirement to be able to figure out how to work remotely, and in places that that in time situations where you don't sort of meet face to face, and that's difficult, of course. Some parts of the job work okay that way, but it's the being able to figure that sort of thing out is helpful. But in terms of the way in which it works, it's whatever business it is, whether it's fintech is still business. It's, it is, and you need to understand the fundamentals.
Yeah, fun. And so what are you currently working on at the moment, or what's next for you?
Well, yeah, I am in a situation where I'm sort of, at a sort of a point of working out what's next, and I'm thinking I might do some more writing and some more blogging about things. In fact, I've got I've started. Funny enough, I've had quite a number of conversations with former students recently, and that's been an absolute delight. And what I'm finding is that I can actually learn from your experience. And to be honest, I've just been talking at you, and I'd much rather we switch this round. We'll do this another time, maybe, where I ask you stuff, because I want to know about your businesses. I want to know where you're going with this book. But I didn't think that was really what you wanted me to say today. But honestly, that's true. But so I want to be able to not necessarily only learn from my former students, but I want to be able to see, because I've got some things to say about the way in which the work happens, and the way in which so many people end up in jobs where they find that they're not really supported properly in it, and maybe there's some ways in which stuff that I've come across could help. And so that's where I'm trying to go with that. I think in the old days I would just immediately sit down and try and write a book, and that might be it. But I think I need to find a place where that will fit on these shelves somewhere, metaphorically. So I'm interested in that. I'm interested in that quite a lot, and and being able to sort of I'm interested in how I can sort of maintain that sort of pace, but also develop things that have nothing to do with work as well, because I've had those on hold for too long. And so the setting up some really cheap keyboards in my shed, cheap keyboard in my shed, has been a joy for me, but possibly not for the neighbours.
Also, you're a musician as well, yeah?
Well, I literally dabble, but it's sort of the simple pleasures of doing things that I've always enjoyed doing. Swimming in outside, in rivers and lakes, making music, shouting at the TV when Villa's playing, that sort of thing. Those are the things. I mean, it sounds like someone's sitting down with their slippers or whatever, but it isn't. It's actually a conscious decision to do the things that I enjoy, and I'm hoping that what will come out of it in terms of the writing and the blogging and trying to figure out how that actually works in a way that gets a reach. That's why I want to ask you about this as well, to find out how to do it. But yeah, there's those sorts of things, and to see the app's not quite dead yet as well. It's sort of
make it reemerge. I mean, it's needed. Like I said, the book that you made, like that was what, 2009. I still got it here somewhere. I'm never gonna throw it away. Yeah. I still got it.
Right. I was thinking I should have it out on the. Well, that's the first one.
Yeah, that's the one I have, the green one.
Yeah. With Marcus and Jane, who were PhD students and all. And then I did another one with Marcus because Jane was far too successful to do that. And then I did another one with someone called Christos Orthodoxou, who was another student. We wrote about. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible title. It's not ours, but we wanted to show how you could get the best out of university. Yes, the studying, but everything else, and make sure you do it in a balanced way. But that was
It works.
And Christos is very successful in his own right now. But
So I've got two last questions for you.
Right.
The first one, since you're a musician, if I dropped you on a desert island, what would be your soundtrack to keep you going?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is, in fact, the lecturer who suggested that I did my PhD is obsessed with desert island discs and the memories that come from it. And every time I look at my list, but I mean, the music I go back to all the time is Bruce Springsteen, pretty much, and that there's it's got to be something like Born to Run, really, which is this idea of moving forward and Yeah, it's a town full of losers. We're pulling out of here to win. I'm afraid that's what I felt about Lancaster. And I go back to it now. It looks rather nice, actually. But it's sort of it didn't feel like that when I was a lad.
Good.
Yeah,
But
ought to run. Yeah.
Second question: is there like a book that you give to people the most? Like you always recommend people is to have it?
No, not one particular one. At the moment, the book that's had the most influence on me recently is one called "There's Nothing for You Here," which is a book about someone who came from a very poor background and ended up in the northeast of England and ended up as the main advisor. Do you know this one of the advisor in the White House, and the story of how she got through all sorts of prejudice to get there. Now, I thought there was absolutely amazing stuff within that, and I'm also at the moment, actually, to be honest, I'm most interested in the thing in looking at the inner voice, what it is, how you talk to yourself, which sounds a bit weird in a way, but and there's a number of books about that which I'm fascinated by, because we tend to be very harsh on ourselves. You drop something, you go, idiot, you do, and you never talk to anyone else like that, but you sort of talk to yourself like that, and it's quite natural to do that, and it's not good, but you can use it the other way, where you can actually use this sort of there's a way of doing sort of affirmations in a very useful way, I think, but it's also the sort of thing that you forget to do all the time, and I'm reminding myself I should as well. But but those sorts of things about the way in which you might be able to change your way you think about it. So there's all sorts of charlatans in that area as well, which I was fascinated by. But thinking about that, there's a way in which you could, I suppose, live a happier and possibly more fulfilled life by looking at things like how you what you say when you talk to yourself.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I have to kind of pull myself up sometimes. I'm like, why am I saying this to myself? Like, what's going on here? Because you don't realize it happening. And I realize some people, they don't even have an inner voice at all. I thought everyone had an inner voice, but yeah, some people don't have an inner voice. I think there's one book. Have you heard of the Chimp Paradox?
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, you got them somewhere there. I think that's about.
I'm ready for one, actually. I'm going to look at it. Yeah.
Professor, thank you so much for today. Just before we go, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, how could they do that? Where can they find you?
If you Google Patrick Tissington, it comes up. There's only one of me. I think there's another one, but he hasn't got a website. Or patricktissington.com. That's where I am.
Awesome. Thank you so much.